Celeste Holloway built her empire fighting stereotypes, but in less than 60 seconds, she almost became one. At her foundation's grand reopening, she publicly accused 2 black teenage scholarship finalists of theft, pointing to security footage as undeniable proof. The crowd believed her. Social media believed her. The boys were seconds away from being escorted out in disgrace, until Andre calmly asked for one thing: play the full footage. What happened next didn't just clear their names. It exposed a betrayal inside Celeste's inner circle and flipped the entire room. The reopening of the Grantwell Foundation Community Innovation Center was designed to symbolize progress. Downtown Chicago shimmered in late afternoon light as cameras clustered near the entrance, capturing every polished detail of the renovated building. Inside, banners highlighted mentorship programs, technology labs, and scholarship pathways for underprivileged youth. At the center of it all stood Celeste Holloway, composed and commanding, her tailored ivory suit sharp against the deep blue backdrop of the foundation's logo. She had built her fortune in the tech industry from modest beginnings, and her name carried the weight of both wealth and responsibility. For many in the crowd, she represented what was possible. Among the invited scholarship finalists were Andre Whittaker and his younger brother Jalen, students from Southside Chicago known for academic excellence and community involvement. Their suits were modest but carefully pressed, their posture reflecting both pride and quiet caution. They had spent weeks preparing for this opportunity, aware that a scholarship from Grantwell could shift the trajectory of their future. They moved carefully through the venue, mindful of the attention such spaces carried. The atmosphere shifted subtly when a foundation staff member approached security near Celeste's private lounge area. Whispers traveled quickly through the inner circle before reaching the stage. A diamond bracelet, an heirloom passed down from Celeste's late mother, was reported missing. The piece was not only valuable but deeply personal, often worn at milestone events. Security staff retraced recent movements through backstage corridors, identifying the Whittaker brothers as having passed near the lounge moments earlier. Instead of allowing a quiet internal check, Celeste made a decision that altered the tone of the entire event. She stepped forward, her voice measured and firm, and acknowledged that security footage showed the boys near the lounge shortly before the bracelet disappeared. She framed her statement as commitment to accountability, emphasizing that integrity was non-negotiable regardless of background. The crowd's reaction was immediate and complicated. Some guests exchanged skeptical glances, others leaned toward certainty, trusting the authority of the woman on stage. Andre stood still as attention shifted toward him. Jalen's hands tightened at his sides, confusion visible across his face. The accusation carried more than suspicion, it carried implication. In a space built to celebrate opportunity, the narrative began to turn toward disgrace. Celeste maintained composure, insisting the evidence appeared clear and that difficult decisions must be addressed openly. As security moved closer to escort the boys out, Andre raised his head calmly and requested that the full security footage be played, not just the segment that had been shown to staff. The request lingered in the charged silence, challenging the certainty that had settled over the room. The large projection screen behind the stage flickered to life, replacing the foundation's celebratory graphics with monochrome surveillance footage. The camera angle was fixed above the private lounge entrance, capturing a narrow hallway lined with framed photographs of past scholarship recipients. The timestamp glowed in the upper corner, precise and impersonal. The crowd leaned forward as the video began to play. The clip showed Andre Whittaker stepping into view first. He paused near a small side table positioned just outside Celeste Holloway's private lounge. On the table sat a velvet jewelry box slightly ajar, its contents not fully visible from that angle. Andre's movement appeared ordinary at first glance, but the camera froze briefly on the frame where his shoulder aligned with the table's edge. The footage then skipped ahead a few seconds, resuming with Jalen walking behind him. Jalen glanced toward the hallway intersection, his expression tense, as though aware of being watched. The video ended moments later. Just before the brothers exited the corridor, murmurs rippled across the room. Staff members exchanged knowing looks. The visual sequence felt damning in its simplicity. The implication was easy to draw. The boys were present, the bracelet was there, and afterward it was gone. On multiple livestream feeds, viewers commented rapidly, some condemning, others speculating. The digital court of public opinion moved faster than the in-person audience, amplifying the accusation beyond the building's walls. Celeste maintained her composure near the podium, hands lightly folded, posture steady. She explained that the footage spoke for itself, reinforcing her commitment to transparency. For a moment, the narrative felt sealed. The evidence appeared straightforward, and the Foundation's security team stood confidently near the control panel. Andre, however, did not lower his gaze or retreat into silence. He studied the screen carefully, as though examining a puzzle rather than defending himself. When he requested that the entire hallway recording be shown from several minutes earlier through several minutes later, the room hesitated. His tone was controlled, neither pleading nor defiant, but resolute. He suggested that a partial clip might not reflect the full sequence of events. Celeste's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Agreeing to the request risked undermining her earlier certainty, yet refusing it would contradict her public stance on integrity. After a measured pause, she instructed the technician to load the complete feed. The video restarted from a wider timestamp. The crowd watched again as Andre and Jalen appeared, passed the lounge entrance, and continued down the corridor. Seconds ticked by after they exited the frame. The hallway remained empty for a brief interval that felt longer in the silence of the room. Then another figure entered from the opposite end, a tall man in a tailored gray suit, recognizable to many in attendance as a senior Foundation board member. He moved toward the same table, paused near the jewelry box, and disappeared into the lounge after the boys were already gone. The extended hallway footage continued without commentary, and the room that had moments earlier felt certain now grew unsettled. After Andre and Jalen disappeared from view, the corridor remained still for nearly 20 seconds. Then a familiar figure entered from the far end. The man moved with confidence, shoulders squared, stride measured, as though he belonged in every private corner of the building. Victor Langston, Chief Financial Officer of the Grantwell Foundation, had overseen its finances for 8 years and was widely regarded as one of Celeste Holloway's most trusted advisors. Victor wore a tailored gray suit that blended into the corporate aesthetic of the event. His access badge granted him unrestricted entry to executive areas, and no one on staff would question his presence near Celeste's private lounge. In the footage, he paused briefly beside the same side table where the bracelet box had rested. His posture shifted subtly. He leaned slightly forward, his hand moving near the velvet case. The camera angle did not clearly capture the object itself, but the movement was deliberate, not incidental. He adjusted something with careful precision before stepping into the lounge for less than a minute. The timestamp showed that Victor exited the lounge seconds before Celeste returned to prepare for her speech. His expression on the recording appeared neutral, composed, and unhurried. He walked down the hallway in the opposite direction of the boys, disappearing from the frame with the same quiet confidence with which he had entered. Inside the auditorium, the crowd's energy shifted palpably. Whispers replaced certainty. Guests who had moments earlier looked toward Andre and Jalen with suspicion now studied the screen with tightened brows. The narrative that had seemed straightforward began to fracture. Celeste stood motionless near the stage steps, her earlier assurance unsettled for the first time. Victor had been instrumental in structuring the Foundation's growth, negotiating partnerships, and protecting financial transparency. His loyalty had never been questioned. Andre remained steady, his expression unchanged, while Jalen's tension eased slightly as the implication unfolded before everyone's eyes. The humiliation that had settled on the brothers began to lift, replaced by a new and uneasy doubt spreading across the audience. When prompted to explain his presence in the footage, Victor maintained composure. He stated that he had stepped into the lounge to retrieve a misplaced event program and confirm final seating arrangements. His explanation was delivered calmly, aligning with the composed image he had cultivated over years of executive leadership. For a brief moment, it seemed possible the movement near the jewelry case had been incidental. However, as the Foundation's technical staff examined the metadata, a discrepancy emerged. The forensic timestamp indicated the hallway footage had been segmented and recompiled earlier that afternoon. The edit occurred precisely 18 minutes before Celeste had first been shown the clipped version implicating the boys. What began as a missing bracelet now widened into something far less visible and far more dangerous. Celeste Holloway requested that the event pause while an internal review team quietly secured the building's backstage systems. The celebration atmosphere dissolved into controlled tension as Foundation staff moved discreetly through corridors once meant for donors and dignitaries. Cameras continued streaming outside, but inside, the focus shifted from public embarrassment to institutional risk. A junior staff assistant, visibly unsettled, recalled a conversation from earlier that afternoon. Victor Langston had asked specific questions about the insurance coverage attached to Celeste's diamond bracelet, inquiring about appraisal documentation and payout timelines in the event of loss. At the time, the inquiry seemed procedural, perhaps even cautious. Now, placed against the unfolding footage, it felt deliberate. The bracelet's valuation was substantial, insured not only for its gemstone quality but for its historical significance as a family heirloom. The potential claim would have been sizable enough to mask discrepancies elsewhere. Celeste authorized a rapid internal financial audit. Within the hour, preliminary findings revealed irregular withdrawals from foundation accounts over the past 6 months. The amounts were structured in increments small enough to avoid triggering automatic compliance alerts, yet consistent enough to form a pattern. Vendor payments lacked corresponding contracts. Administrative expenses appeared inflated. The financial integrity Victor had long overseen now showed fractures beneath its polished reports. The possibility began to crystallize. The accusation against Andre and Jalen may not have been an impulsive error but a calculated diversion. By creating a public scandal centered on theft, Victor could redirect scrutiny away from subtle financial misconduct and toward an emotionally charged narrative that demanded immediate reaction. In that charged moment, Celeste herself had amplified the accusation, unintentionally reinforcing the distraction. Victor's access privileges extended beyond financial systems. As chief financial officer, he possessed high-level clearance to internal security archives, including surveillance storage. The segmented hallway clip shown earlier now appeared less like coincidence and more like preparation. Editing the footage before the event suggested forethought rather than spontaneity. Celeste stood in her executive office overlooking the Chicago skyline, processing the weight of what the evidence implied. For years, she had trusted Victor to protect the foundation's credibility. If he had orchestrated both the theft and the misdirection, the betrayal was not merely operational, it was personal. The true violation was not the disappearance of a bracelet, but the manipulation of trust within her closest circle. An independent IT technician, brought in to avoid internal bias, completed a forensic scan of the security server. The report was precise and unambiguous. The original surveillance file had been edited 18 minutes before the event began, and the edit originated from a device registered under Victor Langston's executive credentials. The energy inside the innovation center shifted with a force no stage lighting could soften. What had begun as admiration now carried an undercurrent of scrutiny. Guests who once leaned toward Celeste Holloway with respect began exchanging measured looks, their confidence unsettled by the unfolding revelations. The earlier certainty that had followed her accusation dissolved into cautious reassessment. Reputation built over decades felt suddenly fragile in the space of minutes. On social media, the narrative reversed almost as quickly as it had formed. Clips of the extended hallway footage circulated widely, highlighting Victor Langston's entry into the lounge after the Whittaker brothers had already left. Commentators who had rushed to defend the accusation now questioned how quickly the boys had been labeled guilty. The live-stream audience swelled, drawn by the visible unraveling of what had seemed a straightforward case. Public sentiment shifted from suspicion toward discomfort. Andre and Jalen remained composed near the edge of the stage, their posture steady despite the emotional weight of the moment. The humiliation they had endured lingered, but they did not seek spectacle or retaliation. Their restraint contrasted sharply with the noise surrounding them. Andre's calm insistence on transparency now appeared less defiant and more principled. Jalen's earlier tension had softened into quiet resolve, his gaze focused forward rather than downward. Celeste stood apart for a brief moment, processing the consequences of her decision to speak publicly before confirming every fact. She had built her career confronting barriers and stereotypes that sought to define young black men before they had the opportunity to define themselves. In her determination to protect her foundation's integrity, she had nearly reinforced the very assumption she once vowed to dismantle. The realization carried a heavier weight than financial loss or public embarrassment. It struck at the core of her identity as both leader and advocate. Guests began questioning her judgment in hushed tones. Some expressed disappointment not in her wealth or authority, but in the speed with which she had aligned suspicion with circumstance. The symbolism was unavoidable. 2 scholarship finalists from underprivileged neighborhoods had been publicly accused in a space designed to uplift them. The foundation's mission now stood against its own misstep. Backstage, security conducted a thorough search of executive offices as part of the internal review. Minutes later, a staff member approached Celeste with controlled urgency. The missing bracelet had been located inside Victor Langston's locked office drawer, placed neatly within a document folder, as though temporarily stored rather than hidden in panic. The discovery confirmed what the footage had begun to suggest and raised a deeper question about intent. With the bracelet recovered from Victor Langston's locked office drawer and the edited surveillance confirmed, the narrative shifted from suspicion to calculation. What had appeared to be a spontaneous accusation now revealed layers of intent. Celeste Holloway convened a closed-door review with independent auditors and legal counsel, while the event remained paused under controlled messaging. The deeper examination of financial records exposed a troubling pattern that extended well beyond a single incident. Victor had been navigating mounting pressure in recent quarters. Foundation expansion projects had outpaced available liquidity, and several high-profile partnerships had failed to deliver projected returns. Instead of alerting Celeste or the board to the shortfall, he adjusted internal reports to preserve stability. Audit trails showed subtle reclassification of expenditures and deferred expense entries that masked growing deficits. The manipulation was sophisticated enough to avoid immediate detection, but not precise enough to withstand forensic scrutiny. The bracelet's extraordinary insurance valuation created a calculated opportunity. A staged theft during a high-profile event would justify a significant claim without raising suspicion about internal finances. The public accusation of 2 scholarship finalists provided an immediate diversion, redirecting scrutiny toward an emotionally charged narrative. The assumption was that the spectacle of suspected theft would overshadow questions about insurance timing or policy adjustments. Victor underestimated the resolve of Andre Whittaker and his insistence on full transparency. Digital evidence connected Victor not only to the edited hallway footage, but also to manipulated audit logs. Access records revealed after-hours modifications to financial summaries that coincided with the timing of the surveillance edit. The plan relied on momentum, on the speed of accusation overwhelming the patience of verification. It depended on the belief that 2 teenage boys would accept removal quietly rather than challenge the narrative in front of donors and media. Celeste absorbed the implications with controlled intensity. The truth cleared Andre and Jalen unequivocally, yet it also illuminated cracks in her own leadership. Her trust in Victor had been unexamined, her oversight of financial systems delegated without rigorous cross-verification. The foundation she built to represent empowerment had nearly become a vehicle for quiet exploitation. Accountability now required more than correcting the record. It demanded reflection on how proximity to power can obscure necessary scrutiny. Outside the conference room, reporters gathered in increasing numbers. News alerts spread nationally, framing the incident as both scandal and revelation. Live cameras continued broadcasting, capturing fragments of movement through glass doors and corridors. Public curiosity intensified, and speculation filled the airwaves. A communications advisor approached Celeste with urgency. Journalists were requesting a formal statement before closing the event. Microphones were already positioned near the stage, and live-stream viewership had doubled. The narrative would solidify based on what she chose to say next, and the cameras were still rolling. When Celeste Holloway stepped back onto the stage, the atmosphere had transformed from celebration to reckoning. The same lights that once illuminated her as a symbol of triumph now cast sharper definition across her expression. The room had not emptied; if anything, it had grown more attentive. Guests, donors, students, and reporters waited in disciplined silence, aware that what followed would define more than a single event. It would define leadership under pressure. Celeste did not begin with defense. She began with correction. She formally retracted her accusation against Andre and Jalen Whittaker, stating that the initial security clip presented had been incomplete and misleading. She acknowledged that she acted on partial evidence and allowed urgency to override verification. Her tone remained steady, but the weight of her admission was unmistakable. The Foundation's internal investigation, she confirmed, had uncovered deliberate manipulation of surveillance footage and financial records by Chief Financial Officer Victor Langston. She outlined the findings without dramatization. The bracelet had been recovered from Victor's private office. Digital forensics connected him to the edited clip shown earlier. Financial audits revealed irregularities now under independent review. Victor had been relieved of his duties effective immediately, pending further legal evaluation. The removal was procedural, not theatrical, reinforcing that the matter was structural rather than personal grievance. Celeste then addressed the broader failure. She acknowledged that leadership carries responsibility not only for vision but for vigilance. Oversight protocols would be restructured, including independent quarterly audits, multi-person authorization for surveillance access, and the establishment of a youth advisory oversight council drawn from scholarship participants. The reforms were specific, signaling intent beyond apology. Throughout the address, Andre and Jalen remained composed near the stage. They neither sought attention nor retreated from it. Their dignity became part of the moment's gravity. The crowd, once quick to absorb suspicion, now watched with a more complex understanding. Celeste's admission did not erase the humiliation the boys had endured, but it shifted the tone from accusation to accountability. There was no theatrical pause, no appeal for sympathy. Celeste concluded by affirming that integrity requires correction when mistakes are made publicly. The applause that followed was restrained but genuine, reflecting respect not for infallibility but for ownership. As she stepped away from the podium, believing the statement complete, movement near the front row drew attention. Andre Whittaker rose slowly, holding something in his hand that had not been part of the earlier investigation. The object caught the stage light briefly, and the room's focus shifted once more toward the young man who had already altered the narrative once that afternoon. Andre Whittaker stepped forward with measured calm, holding his phone in a steady grip that contrasted with the magnitude of the moment. The room, already unsettled by revelations of manipulated footage and financial misconduct, quieted again. He explained that when security first approached him and his brother backstage, something about the urgency felt rehearsed rather than reactive. Anticipating that perception could turn quickly against them, he had activated his phone's recording function and kept it lowered at his side. The video was connected to the auditorium's projection system. The footage displayed a backstage corridor minutes before Celeste had taken the stage. In it, Victor Langston stood with 2 Foundation staff members near the lounge entrance. His tone appeared composed, but his gestures were deliberate. He directed staff to escort the Whittaker brothers discreetly once the signal was given, emphasizing timing and placement near camera angles. The instruction preceded any public announcement of the missing bracelet. The sequence established that the accusation was not spontaneous but orchestrated. The recording contained no raised voices, no dramatic confrontation, only quiet coordination that reframed the entire narrative. It confirmed that Victor's strategy involved isolating the boys before presenting edited surveillance as justification. The manipulation had been designed to appear procedural, even protective of the Foundation's image. Instead, it now exposed calculated intent. Celeste watched the screen without interruption, absorbing the evidence not as rumor but as documented fact. The weight of the realization was visible in her stillness. Around the room, expressions shifted from uncertainty to clarity. Sympathy that had been divided now consolidated decisively in favor of Andre and Jalen. The humiliation they endured was no longer ambiguous, it was engineered. When the video ended, Andre did not escalate the moment. He did not demand punishment or public vindication. He stated simply that fairness mattered more than spectacle. His composure reinforced the principle at the center of the Foundation's stated mission: opportunity without prejudice. Celeste approached the brothers with deliberate respect. She formally extended full scholarships to both Andre and Jalen, not as compensation but as recognition of their merit independent of the incident. She also invited them to participate in the newly formed Youth Advisory Council, granting them a voice in shaping oversight policies that would prevent similar failures. The gesture was measured, signaling reform rather than charity. As the event concluded and guests dispersed into a city already processing the story, Celeste returned to her office to review deeper audit files uncovered during the investigation. Patterns emerged suggesting that Victor's financial manipulations predated the Foundation's recent expansion. The implications extended beyond one-stage theft. If earlier discrepancies had been concealed through quieter tactics, the question remained unresolvedly: how many others had been quietly blamed before the truth finally surfaced? Some stories are not just about who was right or wrong, they're about what we do when we realize we were wrong. If this story meant something to you, let it travel beyond this screen. Share it with someone who believes fairness still matters. And if you value stories that challenge power with truth, you already know how to support more of them. Because in the end, this was never just about a bracelet. It was about judgment. If you were standing in Celeste's place, with your reputation on the line and the crowd watching, would you have paused long enough to question the evidence? Or would you have trusted your authority and moved forward? Be honest. Would you have done anything differently?